Alan, I want to pick up something that I think you said that was really important just a moment ago, which what's really important, I think, to pick it up, which is that um, when confronted with their reasons for why the children identified a certain target, there
Mm,
was there was a reaction that reflected a sense of personal ethics
mm,
about how you treat others,
mm.
which I just wonder what your thoughts are about how surprising that would be for people to know that notwithstanding that they've engaged in harmful sexual behaviour, there's that reaction to their own behaviour.
Mm. Can I answer that with a story?
You can, yeah. The is one that is not a specific case, but made up
Well,
of
I'll make it a combination
yeah.
of so there's nobody identified. Um, Although I have to say this boy that I saw some time back, he did give permission
Mm,
to have his story used into, but I won't.
mm,
I'll combine it because it's typical and it cuts right to the very question you're asking. Because these are typical of kids that will refer to Marys to. They might be 11, 12, 13
mm,
year old, and they'd harmed a child. Perhaps it was in daycare, where this kid had been in a number of placements. Actually, we'll make him an Aboriginal kid uh,
mm,
in this situation who um, was seen when he's referred, he's seen as he's uncooperative. He's done this terrible act to this little
mm,
child, and he won't talk about it. In fact, he doesn't say he didn't do it, but he just
mm,
doesn't say anything. He doesn't seem to care.
mhm,
It, he's had all these forensic assessments over time that suggest, and as I read them, I see words like sex offender.
mm,
I see words like lacking in empathy. I
mm,
see self-centered. I see um, and eventually, I see the word conduct disorder, which seemed to be a kind of a nice rubbish
mm,
bin to put
mm,
to put somebody who didn't fit anywhere else in. And we'll say this particular kid will he's perhaps been removed from his family when he was, you know, 8 years old. He's been in about five different placements. In some, he's actually been subjected to abuse himself and has had
mm,
to be pulled out of the placements. He's he, his school reports are really interesting because he starts off at school and he's not learning,
mm,
and they wonder why, and they don't think that maybe something with his style of learning doesn't fit here, and that he's being racially harassed every day as well. But,
mm,
but he's seen initially as having a learning problem, and they bring in the experts, and that doesn't work. And then he's seen as having some sort of perhaps emotional difficulty, and then he's seen as having a bad attitude, and then he's seen as having a conduct
conduct
disorder in
disorder.
the end.
Yeah. Mm,
And he's aggressive because he's always in fights with other kids.
mm,
And I meet this kid, and he's steeped in shame, like he's
mm,
like a Francis Bacon painting. It's sort of almost folding in on it as though it might
mm,
disappear. And of course, I'm not going to ask him about the
yeah.
sexual harm of this child. But I became a bit interested that he got into a lot of fights.
Mm,
And I find myself a bit intrigued with the kids we meet with because protest is something like from my early political days.
mm,
Protest was kind of the central political thing that I thought was important. And I saw this kid And I started asking him a bit about whether, we got talking into whether he'd stuck up for himself, and a lot of his fights at school, were in, there was an element of protest.
Protest.
Yeah, there was more than protest. I mean, he sometimes did some kind of mean things himself, but there was an element of protest there that I became interested in. And we talked about sticking up for yourself when things feel unfair. And, and I talked a bit in my life about sticking up for things. I kind of agree with stuff like that. And then I just started to become interested in, like, he'd got through these 5 placements. He'd been taken away from his family as a little kid, and I discovered that as a 7-year-old, he'd tried to. His dad had left. His mum had a real big alcohol problem and couldn't manage things in the family. And as a 7-year-old, he would go out and get food. He would look after his younger siblings. He would try and look after his mum.